The collapse battle for the wasteland. The last hope. The world had ended, but the fight for survival had just begun. Long ago, cities stood tall, people thrived, and technology advanced. But then came the collapse, a brutal war, deadly bioweapons, and nuclear fire that destroyed everything. Governments fell, civilizations crumbled, and only a few remained to fight for what was left. Now, the world was nothing but a vast wasteland of ruins, dust, and death. The survivor's journey. Captain Daniel Graves moved cautiously through the remains of an old highway, his rifle held close to his chest. His team followed behind, their eyes scanning the dead landscape. Each step they took kicked up dust from roads that once carried thousands of cars. Now, they led only to silence. Daniel was a soldier before the world fell apart. He had fought wars, led men into battle, and survived horrors that others could not. But nothing had prepared him for this world of hunger, violence, and lawlessness. His group was small but strong. Mira, his second in command. Sharp-eyed, quick with a rifle, and even deadlier with a blade. Jonas, a heavy-built man with a shotgun and a history of breaking bones. Samir, a quiet scavenger, skilled at finding supplies where others saw only junk. Emily, the youngest of them, fast and clever, but too kind for this world. They had one mission: find the power plant, secure it, and survive. The power plant was their last hope. It was said to be one of the only working energy sources left in the wasteland. If they could control it, they could rebuild, find safety, and maybe even bring a small part of the old world back. But they were not alone. The raiders' territory. Through his binoculars, Daniel saw them. The raiders. Filthy, ruthless, and without mercy. They ruled the wasteland with blood and fear. Their leader, a man known only as Vulture, was infamous for leaving his enemies' heads on spikes. His men wore scavenged armor, carried brutal weapons, and had no mercy for the weak. The power plant was already under their control. Guard towers stood tall, armed men patrolled the perimeter, and makeshift barricades blocked the roads. Daniel clenched his jaw. "This won't be easy," he muttered. Mira crouched beside him. "Do we have a plan?" "We wait until nightfall. Then we—" A massive explosion in the distance cut him off. Something worse is coming. The ground shook violently, sending dust and rubble into the air. A thick, black cloud rose from beyond the horizon, glowing red with fire. A deep rumbling sound followed, like thunder but far more menacing. Jonas cursed. What the hell was that? Daniel didn't answer. He was watching the raiders. They had turned away from their patrols, staring at the distant explosion. Some of them shouted, others ran to prepare their weapons. Even the raiders, bloodthirsty, fearless killers, looked uneasy. Something was coming. Mira whispered, "That's not normal." Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. The wasteland was already a nightmare, but now there was something worse out there. And it was getting closer. A dangerous decision. Daniel knew they had only two choices. 1. Attack the raiders now while they were distracted. If they succeeded, they would control the power plant. 2. Wait and see what had caused the explosion. But that meant risking whatever horror was coming their way. He looked at his team. They were tired, hungry, and desperate. He had to make the right call. Jonas cracked his knuckles. "We should hit them now." Samir shook his head. "No, we need to find out what caused that explosion first." Mira looked at Daniel. "Your call, Captain." Daniel exhaled. "Get ready," he said. "Tonight, we move." But deep down, something felt wrong. Whatever had made that explosion wasn't human. And before the night was over, they would find out the truth. Who else is out there? And what will they do to take control of the wasteland? The enemy rises. The wasteland had seen many horrors, but tonight, something worse was coming. The explosion in the distance was no accident. It was a sign. Something powerful was moving, something that sent even the ruthless raiders into a panic. And Daniel Graves knew one thing for sure. Chaos was the best time to strike. The panic of the raiders. From his hidden position, Daniel watched through his binoculars as the raiders scrambled. They were no longer standing guard at the towers or patrolling the gates. Instead, they were shouting orders, grabbing weapons, and looking toward the horizon, where the explosion had come from. Even the feared warlord, Vulture, stood on a raised platform, glaring at the approaching darkness. His men were confused, some even scared. Mira, crouching beside Daniel, smirked. "They're shaken. This is our chance." Jonas tightened his grip on his shotgun. "About time. Let's take that power plant." But Daniel wasn't looking at the raiders anymore. He was listening. A strange sound echoed through the night air. Not gunfire, not explosions. Something else. It was low, guttural, and unnatural. A mix of growls and heavy breathing, followed by distant, inhuman shrieks. Emily whispered, "That doesn't sound like raiders." It wasn't. Something else was coming. The Forsaken arrived. Before anyone could react, dark shapes emerged from the ruins. They moved fast, their bodies twisted and unnatural, some crawling on all fours, others stumbling forward in jerky, unnatural movements. Their eyes glowed dimly, reflecting the faint moonlight. They were not human anymore. The Forsaken. Once survivors of the collapse, now something far worse. Mutated by radiation, starvation, and whatever horrors the wasteland had thrown at them, they had lost their minds, driven only by an endless hunger for flesh. Their bodies were covered in scars and wounds that should have killed them, yet they moved like relentless hunters. Their teeth were jagged, their fingers long and clawed, their skin stretched tight over their bones. And now, they were charging toward the power plant. Chaos erupts. The first Forsaken reached the outer barricades, and the raiders opened fire. Gunshots lit up the night. Muzzle flashes revealed the horrors rushing at them. Some Forsaken fell under the gunfire, but others kept coming, leaping over the walls, clawing at the men, ripping flesh from bone. Screams filled the air. Inside the power plant, raiders were panicking, some trying to fight, others running for their lives. Mira's voice was sharp. "Now's our moment, Daniel. We go in before it's too late." Daniel hesitated. This wasn't just a raider fight anymore. It was a massacre, a desperate choice. Daniel had spent years fighting other men, but this was different. They could rush in, take advantage of the chaos, kill the raiders, and claim the plant. But if they did that, they'd have to fight the Forsaken alone. The raiders had the numbers, weapons, and defensive positions, but they were disorganized, scared. If Daniel's team helped them, they might stand a chance against the Forsaken. It was an impossible choice. Jonas grunted. "You're not seriously thinking about helping those scumbags." Emily swallowed hard. "If the Forsaken kill them all, what happens next? They come for us." Samir, the quiet one, finally spoke. "We can't fight them alone." Daniel took a deep breath. He had never imagined working with raiders. They were brutal, merciless killers. But right now, they were human killers. And the things coming for them were not human at all. He looked at his team. "We're going in," he said, "but not as enemies." Mira frowned. "We're helping them." Daniel nodded. "For now. If we don't, we all die. Enemies become allies." Daniel stood from his cover, raising his rifle. Then he fired into the Forsaken. A single precise shot hit one in the head, dropping it instantly. Then another. The raiders noticed. Some turned their weapons toward Daniel's team, unsure whether to shoot or not. Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran straight toward them, shouting over the gunfire, "If you want to live, fight with us." For a moment, Vulture just stared at him. Then the warlord grinned. "About time, soldier boy." Vulture raised his massive shotgun and blew a Forsaken's head apart. The alliance had begun. The battle for the power plant. Daniel and his team fought side by side with the raiders, pouring bullets into the charging horrors. Jonas crushed a Forsaken's skull with the butt of his shotgun. Mira slashed one's throat open, dodging its flailing claws. Samir picked off the ones trying to climb the walls, dropping them with perfect headshots. Emily used her speed, weaving between attacks and stabbing deep with her knife. But the Forsaken kept coming. One raider screamed as a Forsaken tackled him, biting deep into his throat. Another was dragged over the barricade, his body vanishing into the darkness. For every Forsaken they killed, 2 more took its place. Daniel gritted his teeth. They couldn't hold the plant like this. Then Vulture yelled something over the gunfire. To the generators, we have flamethrowers. A desperate plan formed in Daniel's mind. If they could ignite the fuel reserves, they might burn the Forsaken before they overran the plant. But reaching the generators meant moving deeper into the facility, closer to the danger. They had one chance, and they had to move now. Can enemies become allies when survival is at stake? The battle begins. The air inside the ruined power plant was thick with tension. Daniel stood with his rifle in hand, watching the group of raiders around him. They were not friends, not even allies, just survivors forced together by desperation. The Forsaken were coming, and if they didn't work together, none of them would live to see another sunrise. You trust these guys? Jacob whispered, gripping his shotgun. Daniel shook his head. I don't trust anyone. But we need them. We can't fight alone. The raider leader, a scared man named Riker, smirked. Don't worry, soldier boy. We want to live just as much as you do. We fight together, or we die. A distant howl echoed through the night. Then another. The Forsaken were near. Positions, Daniel ordered. The survivors took cover behind broken machinery and rusted beams. The power plant was dark, but the moonlight streaming through shattered windows cast eerie shadows on the walls. The silence stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Then the nightmare arrived. The Forsaken burst through the doors like a tidal wave. Their bodies were twisted mockeries of humanity. Gray skin stretched over sinewy muscle, glowing red eyes filled with hunger. They moved too fast, their claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. Gunfire erupted, flashing in the darkness like lightning. Bullets tore through the Forsaken, but they barely slowed. One leaped onto a raider, tearing his throat open before anyone could react. Another smashed into a barricade, sending debris flying. Daniel fired at a Forsaken charging towards him, but it didn't stop. He barely had time to roll away before its claws ripped into the concrete where he had stood. He raised his rifle again and shot it point-blank in the head. The creature snarled before collapsing. Fall back, Riker shouted, swinging a mash sheet at a Forsaken's neck. The blade cut deep, but the monster still moved. It took 3 more strikes before it finally fell. Jacob was wrestling with one of the creatures, trying to keep its teeth away from his face. Daniel rushed forward, slamming his rifle butt into the Forsaken's skull. It stumbled back just long enough for Jacob to unload a full clip into its chest. The creature collapsed, but 2 more took its place. We're not going to make it. Someone screamed. Daniel knew they were right. The Forsaken were too many. The ground was already littered with the dead, both humans and monsters. Their last stand was failing. Then, amidst the chaos, Daniel saw it. A metal hatch, half buried beneath rubble. It was old, covered in dust and grime, but intact. A bunker. There, he yelled, pointing. Riker followed his gaze and cursed. You think it's safe? It's safer than out here. The survivors fought their way toward the hatch. Riker and another raider pulled the debris away while Daniel and Jacob provided cover. The door was heavy, rusted shut, but with a final desperate effort, it creaked open. Inside now, Daniel shouted. One by one, the survivors rushed in. The last few seconds were chaos. Gunfire, screaming, the growls of the Forsaken. Daniel shoved Jacob through the opening and followed, slamming the hatch shut just as the monsters reached them. Silence. For a moment, all anyone could do was breathe. Then, someone lit a flashlight. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. Strange markings covered the walls. The air was thick with dust, but something else lingered. A presence, old and waiting. Riker let out a low whistle. What the hell is this place? Daniel swallowed, his heart still racing. I don't know, but we might have just found something worse than the Forsaken. Is this the key to saving humanity or unleashing something worse? Secrets of the old world. The metal doors slammed shut, sealing Daniel and his team inside the underground bunker. For a moment, all they could hear was their own heavy breathing and the distant screams of the Forsaken outside. Then came the pounding, a sickening, relentless hammering against the steel doors. They had bought themselves time, but not much. And in that time, they had to find a way to survive. The forgotten bunker. The bunker was cold and dark, untouched for years. Dust covered the metal floors, and the air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, barely illuminating the massive underground chamber ahead of them. Jonas adjusted his shotgun. What the hell is this place? Mira scanned the walls, where faded markings revealed an old-world insignia. Military, pre-collapse. Emily shivered. Feels like a grave. Samir, always the quiet observer, pointed to a symbol on the wall, a stylized DNA helix. Below it, faded words read, Project Genesis. Daniel frowned. Genesis. He had heard that name before, buried in old war records. But what was it doing here? They needed answers. And fast. The truth in the machines. Moving deeper, they found rows of old computer terminals, covered in dust. Some were shattered, others blinking faintly, still alive after all this time. Vulture, standing at the back, grunted. Whatever this place is, it's ancient. Daniel wiped the dust from a screen and pressed a button. To his surprise, the terminal whirred to life, casting a green glow. A voice echoed through the room. Project Genesis. Status. Incomplete. Then, without warning, a hologram flickered into existence. A woman, dressed in a sleek uniform, stood before them, a recording from the past. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a deep sadness. If you are hearing this, then humanity has fallen. The team exchanged uneasy glances. The hologram continued. Project Genesis was designed to restore civilization after the collapse. We built it as humanity's last hope, a way to rebuild the world. Jonas scoffed. Yeah. Then why didn't it work? The woman's face darkened. Because we made a mistake. The horrifying truth. The bunker shuddered as another heavy blow struck the doors. The Forsaken were still trying to break through. But Daniel's attention was locked on the hologram. Genesis was more than a survival program. The woman explained. We attempted to create the next step in human evolution. Mira's eyes narrowed. Next step. The hologram nodded. Stronger, faster, resistant to disease and starvation. We were building survivors. The room fell silent. Jonas whispered, Oh, hell. The pieces were falling into place. The mutations, the unnatural hunger, the Forsaken. Emily's voice trembled. You're saying they were made. The hologram continued, oblivious to their horror. Something went wrong. The genetic enhancements became unstable. The subjects lost control, lost reason. They turned on us. The Forsaken weren't an accident of the wasteland. They were created. The monsters outside. The pounding at the doors grew louder. Samir cursed. They're getting in. Daniel snapped back to reality. They couldn't stay here. But they also couldn't leave empty-handed. If Genesis was meant to rebuild, he said, then there must be something we can use. Vulture chuckled darkly. Yeah, What, you want to make more monsters? Daniel ignored him and turned back to the console. The project failed, but maybe, just maybe, they had a failsafe. Mira pointed at another panel. There's something here. The hologram flickered again. Final log. If you are hearing this, the facility is lost. We activated the purge. Jonas frowned. The what? The woman's holographic face looked almost guilty. A weapon. The last resort. A way to wipe them out. The final weapon. Daniel's heart pounded. A weapon. Something powerful enough to stop the Forsaken. Mira leaned in. Where is it? The hologram hesitated. Then with a final, almost whispering voice, she spoke. Deep below. The hologram vanished, and the screen went dark. A deep rumble shook the bunker. The Forsaken were nearly through. Daniel made his choice. We go deeper. Find that weapon. Jonas groaned. You sure about this? No. Daniel looked at the shaking doors. But we don't have a choice. With that, the team moved toward the darkened corridor ahead, toward whatever waited below. Outside, the Forsaken screamed. Time was running out. Can they unlock the secrets of the past before the monsters reach them? A deadly choice. The air inside the bunker was heavy with dust and tension. The survivors had barely caught their breath when they discovered the control room. Rusted monitors lined the walls, showing static-filled screens. A single terminal flickered with an eerie green glow. Jacob wiped sweat from his brow. What is this place? Daniel stepped forward, scanning the terminal. He tapped a few keys, and the screen changed. A schematic appeared, a device buried deep within the facility. Riker narrowed his eyes. What the hell is that? Daniel read the words on the screen aloud. Project Purge. Final Containment Protocol. He paused, his throat dry. It's a weapon. A last resort measure to wipe out infected life. The room fell silent. You mean, it can kill all the Forsaken? One of the raiders asked, his voice filled with hope. Daniel nodded. Yes, but there's a problem. He hesitated before continuing. The weapon doesn't know the difference between them and us. If we activate it, we're all dead. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. The flickering light made their shadows dance across the walls like ghosts. Then what are we waiting for? A raider named Cole stepped forward. If we don't use it, we'll die anyway. The Forsaken are coming. Are you insane? Jacob snapped. We need to find another way. Maybe we can reprogram it or... There's no time. Cole interrupted. They've breached the plant. If we don't act now, we won't even get the chance. A deep, guttural roar echoed from above. The Forsaken were in the building. Riker clenched his fists. We vote. We don't have time to argue. Who says we activate the weapon? Cole and two other raiders raised their hands immediately. A moment later, Riker joined them. Jacob looked at Daniel. We can't do this. We need to fight. We survived this long. We'll find another way. Two others nodded in agreement, but fear was in their eyes. Daniel's heart pounded. He looked at the screen, at the blinking cursor waiting for a command. One choice could mean total destruction. The other could mean a slow, painful death at the hands of the Forsaken. He had to decide. Above them, the sound of metal screeching filled the air. The Forsaken were breaking through. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. Time was running out. Riker stepped forward. Daniel, you're in charge. What's it going to be? Do we risk everything or die fighting? Daniel clenched his jaw, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The weight of survival pressed down on him like never before. He had to choose. Will they risk everything on a weapon that could destroy them all? The final stand. The underground facility shook violently as the Forsaken finally broke through. Screams and growls echoed through the dimly lit corridors. Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. His team had fought through hell to get here, and now they stood at the edge of their final battle. The Forsaken were everywhere, their mutated bodies moving in a frenzy, eyes glowing with hunger. This was it. The last stand. The swarm attacks. Hold the line, Daniel shouted. The first wave of Forsaken rushed in, their clawed hands reaching out, their twisted bodies moving unnaturally fast. Jonas fired first, shotgun blasts ripping through flesh, sending blood splattering against the walls. Mira, despite her injuries, fought beside him, her pistol spitting fire as she took down creature after creature. Samir tossed a grenade. Fire in the hole. The explosion ripped through the horde, sending burning bodies crashing into each other. But more came. Always more. Emily screamed as one of the creatures tackled her, gnashing teeth inches from her face. Daniel spun and fired, the bullet tearing through its skull. "Stay together," he shouted. "We don't back down." But they were losing ground. The last chance. Mira staggered to a nearby console, blood dripping from her shoulder wound. She had been hit, but she kept moving. "Daniel," she gasped. "The Genesis system. There's an override." Daniel turned, panting. "What kind of override?" She typed rapidly. Old, forgotten code scrolled across the cracked screen. "A way to wipe them all out," she said. "Purge the Forsaken. Burn everything." Jonas, reloading his shotgun, glanced over. "Sounds good to me. Do it." Mira's face was pale. "It's not that simple." Daniel already knew the answer. Someone has to stay. The room fell deathly silent, except for the growls closing in. Emily shook her head. "No. We can find another way." "There is no other way," Daniel said. "The override required a manual activation from the control panel. Someone had to stay behind to press the final command. Someone had to die." Making the choice, Mira tried to stand, but her wound was too severe. She swayed, gripping the console for support. "I'll do it," she whispered. Daniel caught her before she collapsed. "No, you won't," he said firmly. Jonas stepped forward. "Then I'll." Daniel shook his head. No. He had led them here. He had brought them this far. If anyone had to do this, it was him. "This is my fight," he said. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." The others looked away, their faces twisted in pain. But there was no time to argue. The Forsaken were climbing over the barricades, crawling from the vents, breaking through doors. Daniel turned to his team. "Go," he ordered. No one moved. He shoved Jonas toward the escape tunnel. "That's an order." Jonas clenched his jaw, then grabbed Mira and supported her. Samir saluted. "See you on the other side, Captain." Daniel forced a smile. "I'll hold you to that." One by one, they disappeared into the darkness. Then he was alone. The last battle. Daniel turned back just as the Forsaken surged forward. He fought with everything he had. His rifle roared, bullets ripping through the horde. When it ran dry, he switched to his knife, slashing, stabbing, refusing to fall. Blood covered the floor. His, theirs, it didn't matter anymore. But he held them back long enough. The countdown on the console reached 0. A deep hum filled the air. The facility shook. A final command appeared on the screen. "Purge acti." ATE. The end, or the beginning. Outside, the team watched in silence as the ground beneath them rumbled. A bright flash of energy erupted from the bunker, spreading outward in a deadly wave. The Forsaken shrieked in agony, their bodies disintegrating into dust. And then, silence. Mira collapsed in grief. Emily turned away, wiping her tears. Jonas clenched his fists. He did it. Daniel was gone. But the Forsaken were no more. The wasteland had a chance to rebuild. But at what cost? Is this the end, or is there still a chance for survival? Rebirth of a new world. The override worked. The deadly pulse spread through the power plant, neutralizing the Forsaken. Their monstrous shrieks echoed through the halls as their bodies convulsed, collapsing like puppets with severed strings. But they weren't dead. Not all of them. Some twitched, their eyes no longer burning with rage. Some groaned in confusion, as if waking from a terrible nightmare. Mira stood in the control room, her breath shaky. She watched the monitors as the chaos outside slowed. Daniel's plan had worked, but at what cost? The aftermath. The surviving Forsaken lay scattered across the plant, some still unconscious, others staring blankly at their hands as if they no longer recognized themselves. Whatever Genesis had done, it hadn't wiped them out completely. It had changed them. Mira turned to the others, what remained of their team. Jacob, bruised and bleeding, leaned against a control panel, his rifle hanging limply at his side. Elena was already tending to the wounded, her hands moving quickly despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "We did it," Jacob whispered, almost in disbelief. Mira nodded, but her heart felt heavy. Yeah, but at what cost? She turned her gaze to the far side of the room, where Daniel had fallen. His body was still, his face pale. He had fought till the end, ensuring Genesis was activated. Now he was gone. Elena knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. She closed her eyes and shook her head. He's gone. Silence filled the room. No one spoke. No one moved. They had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Securing the plant. With the power plant secured, the remaining survivors got to work. They reinforced the doors, sealed off broken sections, and set up a perimeter. The plant was theirs now. More survivors arrived over the next few hours, drawn by the sudden collapse of the Forsaken's rampage. Some had once been enemies, raiders and scavengers who had fought against them just days ago. Now, they stood together. The Forsaken who had survived the override were weak, confused. Some were recovering their human thoughts and memories. Others weren't so lucky. Some had lost their minds completely, left in a state between man and monster. Mira watched as a young man, barely 20, cried as he looked at his hands. I remember, he whispered. I remember who I was. Not all could be saved, but some could, and that meant hope, a vow to rebuild. Night fell over the wasteland, but for the first time in years, the sky didn't feel hopeless. The power plant hummed with life, its generators supplying energy to nearby settlements. The survivors gathered around the old courtyard, lighting torches and campfires. Mira stood before them, Daniel's blood-stained dog tags in her hand. We lost good people, she said, her voice steady. But we're still here, and for the first time in years, we have a future. We have power. We have a chance. She looked at the faces in the crowd. Warriors, scavengers, former enemies who had become allies. Daniel believed in something bigger than survival. He believed in rebuilding. That's what we're going to do. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Some nodded. Others clenched their fists, determined. Jacob stepped forward. The wasteland is still dangerous, but we have the power to change that. Mira looked toward the dark horizon. Then let's start. The war is far from over. As dawn broke, Mira stood atop the plant's roof, gazing out over the ruins of the old world. The Forsaken were weakened, but they weren't gone. The wasteland was still filled with dangers, and somewhere, beyond the horizon, there were still threats they hadn't faced yet. But for the first time since the collapse, there was hope. The battle was won, but the war for survival was far from over.